You're listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.
So you're listening to Hamish
and Scott.
And this week we are going to be talking about, Scott is going to be talking about manufacturing, which is a hugely important and often controversial subject when it comes to getting your design and product off to market. So Scott, do you want to
sure.
lead us in?
So it's one of those things, manufacturing, I guess some of it's going to be a little bit of a warning, because a lot of people think that once the design's done, all the R&D is finished. Mm-hmm. And so they jump into manufacturing. It's a black and white, it's a science, it's engineering. Nothing can possibly go wrong or need changing or whatever, but really when it comes down to it, especially when you're doing unique products, sometimes, quite often when I do unique products, what makes them unique is that you're using a different manufacturing process, or you're modifying a manufacturing process to suit your product, which no one else has done before, and that's what gives you your patentable aspect. So in that case, you have to get the manufacturer to buy in. I've had jobs before where we've got 8 people to quote the job, and 7 people have said it can't be done, and we've then managed to get a person who said it can be done. We think it can be done. You sit with them and you work through what you're imagining, how it can be done, and you can make it work. There's very few things I've ever, and there's nothing actually I've ever done, touch wood, that I haven't been able to make work. But you have to realise that if you are going into manufacturing, there is a level of R&D to it. So just keep that in mind. Don't just think that there's a 10-week lead time, it's going to take 10 weeks. Quite often there'll be a level of working the product back and forth till it's perfect. You never really know how something's going to come out of a tool.
So just to clarify, Scott, when you say something might not come out quite as you see it from a tool, when you talk about tooling, you're talking about anything from a mould. You might just want to explain that.
Yeah, sure. So most mass-produced products, which is primarily what we deal in, things that are made for the world market, so you're talking hundreds of thousands of units possibly, hopefully, they usually have a tooling process. So to make something in mass, generally, so if you were to prototype something, you do a 3D print. Might take
a one-off
12 hours. One-off. It might take you another 12 hours to finish it, clean it up and paint it and all the rest of it. So you're looking at 24 hours to make a part. Of course, that part's going to be much, much more expensive than a product that comes out of an injection molding tool, which has a 30-second cycle.
Right.
And obviously, with tooling, you're spending more money up front to make a big iron tool or steel tool that produces a part in the hundreds of thousands, one every minute or so, in perfect finished condition, other than taking a gate off or a screw off. And in order to inject that part, you're never really quite sure. Plastics, there are computer simulators to tell you, where the stress and strain is and all the rest of how it flows, everything like that. But really, when it comes down to it, you make a part until you've injection molded it. You don't know how it's going to shrink and shift after that part's been made. So when I get a tool back, I will, for injection molding, for example's sake, and it happens with press tools, cast tools, cast parts, the die cast parts, all these sort of products, they go in hot and they cool down. So there's a level of shrinkage, and they can bow and they can do all sorts of things. They can have, twists in them or whatever, or they can shrink in a certain area which you hadn't anticipated. So what we do in that process, we will make a product tool safe so that it's bigger than it needs to be in a certain area, so we can always take metal off to make it smaller where we want it to be, and we'll test, or sorry, the other way around, we might make it might be smaller than it has to be, and we expand it into the space by taking metal off the tool. So it's easy to take metal off a tool, but it's hard to put metal on a tool because you've got to weld it. So there's all these things that come into manufacturing that you really may not anticipate when you start the project. And it's just nice. A lot of what I do is manage people's expectations. And sometimes you get caught. We've got a project right now, and all the hard bits are done. And the easiest part, we thought was going to be the easiest part, is still in production, because it's just been a nightmare product. It just hasn't been easy to get into tolerance, even though the manufacturer said it was quite easy to do. So you can get caught out, but you've got to anticipate that sort of thing. The other thing is, I guess, where do you manufacture it? Do you manufacture it locally? Like if we're in Australia, do we manufacture it in Australia? Or do we go overseas? And a lot of people just think, I'm just going to go to Asia or China or whatever and do it overseas because it's cheaper. It doesn't necessarily hold true, because if you look at the entire cost, your exchange rates, your duties, your freight, possibility of a fault in the product before it gets back here, you can easily chew up all the costs that you've saved in one container full of product with a fault in it. And so you really got to look at it, do you want a quality product? Are you going to QC it yourself in your own eyes, or are you going to let someone else do it overseas who may not understand what quality levels you want out of it? We've had a situation where one of my best suppliers in China, very, very diligent, but they changed from a master batch to a powder batch for colouring, and the specification said 10%. Of course, the powder in 10% was far, far darker than a master batch in 10%. And the product came, 40,000 parts turned up, all the wrong colour. And it doesn't make a difference to them, because they just think, it's still a good part, still works and looks good.
Well, that's
my branding's based around a certain colour.
Yeah. No, I think that's where the experience I've had with clients, and I don't get involved in the actual production side of it with tooling, but certainly the comments I've heard were my clients that have been successful with using overseas suppliers, like going to China, they've had to stay there. They've had to go and monitor the process, like you said before, the quality control, the QC aspect of it. They were watching it come off the line, and they were making changes as they went. And if they hadn't have done that, they said they would have, like you've just said, got a whole load of parts back which were incorrect. Which and obviously that's the thing too when you're looking at, and that doesn't apply just to China. I mean, if you're a manufacturer or you're a plant, you get given some specifications, and if you do what you think is to spec, well then that's a successful project, job done, move on to the next one. But as the entrepreneur or the inventor, if there's something that's not quite right yet it's still to spec but still hasn't made the product perfect, and you're not there to correct that, well then you've still got to take delivery of those goods.
Exactly right.
And I've seen that happen a lot, actually. I've seen that happen with someone who designed a tap, some tapware, and unfortunately with the way they were manufacturing it, he wasn't there. Was every fifth box that he opened, and it was actually, he said it was quite spooky, it was every fifth box there was a fault, and it was just the way it was coming off the line that there was a fault in every fifth one. He doesn't quite understand why, but he had to take delivery, and then when he asked the manufacturers, look, why is everyone faulty? They said, well, it's not faulty, does it work? And he said, well, actually, yeah, it works, but I can't sell that retail for what I want to ask for retail, as in the price of the product. You'd have to give it away. In fact, you couldn't even give it away because the handle was loose. Yet, if you could actually use it as a tap. So there's two sides of that manufacturing process. There's, yes, it works, and then there's, it just doesn't look good. So from a sales perspective and a marketing perspective, you can't put that on a shelf. No. We don't have that sort of culture here where that may be acceptable. It's not acceptable at all.
So those sort of costs don't often get factored in. Cost of faulty goods, and I mean, once you've shipped something across, you've paid for all the shipping, insurance, all the rest, all the duties, all been paid for, and it's a finished, all the assembly's been paid for, all the value add has been paid for when it lands here. So just to ask for a rebate on the cost of the manufactured good doesn't cover it. The other thing is, like, if you are manufacturing overseas, okay, you might, say the quote's 20 grand less than you quote in Australia. And don't get me wrong, there's certain things we just can't compete against. We can buy repetition parts from China for less than we can buy the stock here in Australia. There's certain things, I don't know how it works, but subsidies or whatever it might be that make things cheaper over there that we can't do here. But with certain things we can compete. Injection molding, we can compete with certain manufacturers. And if you say your tooling for an injection molded part here is 20 grand more than your Chinese part, once you consider if I have to fly up there for you to solve a problem in the project, there's probably a good chunk of that 20 grand gone, especially if we both go up. There's a big chunk of money gone in flights and my wages and all the rest of it to get up there and come back again.
Well, you always fly first class. Six-star hotels, so I mean, I'm not surprised.
I want a broomstick.
Sorry, Scott doesn't do that. I'm just being silly.
I don't do that. I do make it as cheap as possible. But even then, it's a very expensive process.
Yeah.
And it can be multiple trips. We've got a problem in Taiwan at the moment, and Thailand at the moment, and I could have gone up 3 or 4 times. I've managed to do things remotely through different means. And but easily could have gone up 3 or 4 times if I had have not been able to solve over the phone or email, internet. The other thing is, if you are going to do stuff overseas, you really have to have a good referee, a good credible source. So for my products, anyone I use overseas, I've gone and visited. I've put the time in, I've gone and visited, shook hands, seen their setup, and I know what they're all about. We do have a product which is an amazing safety product, which I'd love to see on the market, and we had a credible source for manufacturing, and it was 20 grand more than one that I found on Alibaba. That product is 5 years old and never made to market, and there's a distributor who would sell that to the mining companies every day of the week. He'd be a multi-millionaire by now if he had just gone with a credible source and not gone with a company. And in the end, if he had more money, he could have made it through, but he just ran out of money because trying to make it work, it just chewed up all his money, and you ran out of money to the point where he couldn't afford to get me to go up there and solve it and all that sort of stuff. So, and it's a real shame. It drives me insane, because I see these great products, and for 20 grand, you've killed the whole product.
Well, I think also I'd just like to mention that it also, when it relates to marketing, because I was talking to someone the other day, and it was the same. It will end up being the same situation, I feel, where you can save. Obviously, you've got, as a business, you've got to look at saving costs where you can. But I think in relation to this manufacturing, a cost saving at manufacturing often means an added cost somewhere else. And so that was a great example you just gave before, where a cost saving of $20,000 has obviously potentially cost this person millions of dollars. Yeah. So there's always even to delays in sale, in launch. Every week you're not selling, it's costing you money, so you've got to consider that as well. Yeah, no, because I was talking to someone the other week, and I had to explain to them that, look, yes, I can understand you wanting to move away from a particular platform for marketing. It's going to be a cost saving. However, the potential loss of the volume of traffic to your product is such that you're going to have to spend I was just trying to work it out in my head what it could cost to be 5 times more than the current platform that you're using. So where there's a cost saving, yes, of course, you can not market in a particular arena because it's costing X and you can see the price going up. But I said, look, the reason the price to advertise on this particular platform is going up is because it's supply and demand. Unfortunately, the demand for it, and there's a huge supply of customers coming in to have a look. If you want to get out of that, well, then you've got to have a pretty good plan to say, well, this is where I'm going to draw my audience and potential prospective customers from. So again, there was 2 ways of looking at it. Again, I think, and that applies to marketing as it does to manufacturing, where you can see a cost saving. There's obviously, there often is. You've got to really evaluate it. Look at it holistically. That's what I say. Yeah. Got to look at the whole picture. And that's why it pays to use people like us, only for the fact that we've seen so many examples of people doing it the right way and the wrong way. And I think the most important learnings for both of us is to have seen people do it the wrong way. And not the wrong way, just another way that they thought was best at the time, which, yes, a $20,000 saving is huge if you're starting out. But the cost down the track, the cost, the added cost for using that option, going with that option, can sometimes far outweigh the initial saving. And in that product, it was only a 20% saving because the full tooling setup was quite high. So it wasn't really worth the mistake or the loss. But anyway, I guess these are sort of factors that you have to consider. The one thing I'll do is always get quotes from both, a number of sources, and each project will have, a very complicated project. We'll try not to do overseas. I'll try and do it here, because more than likely I'll have to be involved and going, it's just around the corner. It's quite cheap for me to just sneak out there and discuss things and work them through. And it's been very, very common that I get involved in the tooling process and work through what's in my mind, how I'm picturing products being manufactured, and then the toolmaker can buy into that ideal. And we've had situations where we've had, I think, every conceivable operation you can do in an injection molding tool we put into one end cap, because it needed to be IP66, which means it's waterproof to a certain level, which is pretty much down to 3 meters sort of thing. And if we had have just added seals and components to it, it would have just
more than likely leak. So we reduced all the seals out of it, and we needed a certain operation and a tooling, and that was the one we looked at, seven or eight different companies, and only one said they could do it. And by working and sitting with them, we worked it out. I'd never done that overseas. That was one of those projects I said, look, it's cheaper to do overseas, but we won't do it overseas because by the time I've gone and sat with these people, there's going to be troubles with it. We're going to have it here locally. So yeah, as I said, just have a holistic view, look at all the costs, account for them, and that's what I can do. I can sort of put the two quotes on paper and then estimate or forward think through what other costs might be involved, and then we can sort of put the holistic look, the holistic picture in front of you and say, it is cheaper in China by 20 grand, but you'll have these delays, or you could have these delays, you could have me going up there twice, and that's why I think we should use local, and then it's up to the client still, they can decide from there.
Also from before I forget, I wanted to ask you, is there legal benefit from manufacturing in Australia? Because the thing which is interesting, because I was just listening on the news just this morning that, and I didn't realise you could do this, but in China, a Chinese court has found an Australian company to be, this is something I heard on the radio, but apparently there was a wine fraud is huge. Brands like Penfolds, obviously ripe for copying, things like Grange, as in the label. It's a very, everyone knows what Grange is usually. So, but and the demand for Australian wine in China is massive, and so this Australian company was found guilty in a Shanghai court, I think, this morning, of misleading customers in China with their brand, because their name, I don't know what, I'd have to look up this article, but their name and their logo was very similar to Penfolds, and they were actually using a tagline that said Australia's oldest winery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so obviously they were getting away with it for a long time. They're making an awful lot of money out of it, and good on China. They've actually pulled it up. I didn't realise that. Well, that's to the extent that China had progressed in terms of policing trademark and patent laws, which is great to see, because that's the other thing I was going to ask you is, if you go to an overseas manufacturer anywhere, not just China, anywhere in the world, here we have, if you work with people like Scott and I have NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, so anything that he shares with me and vice versa, if that's the case, there's legal protections and ramifications for people that divulge information. But if you're going overseas, is that a concern?
Yeah, certainly. We always have,
because as soon as you send something over there, there's nothing to say that you could have the money to prosecute and say we want to follow this up, but someone in the factory seen your product decided to copy it.
Generally with our stuff, we've got a really strong patent in place. You're really more concerned with them selling into a country you have patented. So the people I deal with are really reputable. I've never had an issue, touch wood. The only issues we've had is a couple of, one of my clients got copied, but it was an Australian company copying an Australian company using a Chinese manufacturer, and they just didn't understand patent law. They said, we've changed it by 10%. I said, well, change it by 10%. That you're talking about a design registration, not a patent. This is a fully patented functional patent. So, you have to do it a completely different way. And they didn't even understand that. And I think he was an industrial designer, so he should have known better. But no, I don't find the people I use. I don't find frightening at all. We have a suppliers agreement and we have a non-disclosure agreement. So the suppliers agreement, the non-disclosure agreement means I won't take your information and share it with other people. And a suppliers agreement is more about who owns the tool. Once you've paid for it, are you able to take it away from them at any point? Because if anything happens, you're over a barrel. Your tool's over in another country. Your whole company's based around that tool, possibly. And so, what's my access to that tool if I want to bring it back to Australia? Say the exchange rate just goes to 50%, because in Asia they get paid in US dollars. So we're always at the mercy of the US dollar in Australia. So at the moment it's 70%. So we're paying 30% more than if you were buying it in Australia. So that comes into it as well. Exchange rates are very important. So if all of a sudden, the American dollar goes to 2, you really want to get those tools out of China and bring them back to Australia, because it makes more sense. If you don't own them through your agreement, then they're going to hold on to them and say, no, we want to keep manufacturing your product, so you can't take them. If a typhoon goes through and your tools get washed out to sea, who pays for that? Who replaces the tools? All this information. If there's maintenance to be done, How many shots are they guaranteed for? Is it export quality? Because sometimes in China they'll make a tool to suit Chinese conditions. So in China they've got very cheap labour, so they can make tools that have got lower quality guides because they know every 6 months they'll just replace them because they can afford to do it. They might have a manual operation, which if you had over here, you'd have automated, so you wouldn't have a guy or a girl sitting at the machine 24 hours a day running the parts. So you've got to stipulate export quality tooling. You've got to stipulate high quality steels. You've got high quality guides. All these things have to be stipulated in the purchase. Otherwise, it might be 20 grand cheaper, but you might be getting a far inferior product. You might have a tool that might even last 50,000 shots, and then you have to buy another tool. Or maintain that tool. Whereas if you buy a high-speed tool here, tool steel, P13 here, a very high-grade tool steel here, you may never have to replace it or maintain it. It's got such high-quality tool steel, which costs more, of course, but it'll last hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of shots. But a shot is just each time a part gets made. So there's lots to consider, and that's why I guess we're here to advise on the best options. Look at the quote, see what's involved, see what you're getting for your money, and give you all the pros and cons about doing it here or overseas.
Fascinating stuff. So it's really about, I suppose the only thing we can end off with is you've just got to be very mindful of what the actual cost is of manufacturing, not just the financial cost. So it could cost you a lot more.
You've been listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.